Hi, I'm Claire. And yeah, I know how this sounds. My brother's 10th anniversary dinner was held at my restaurant. He walked in like he owned the place, introduced me to his boss as my little sister who waitresses here, and then told me to smile more because I was embarrassing him. That restaurant? I built it from nothing. Every tile, every light fixture, every menu item. Mine. But that wasn't even the part that broke something open in me. The part that did was that my mother was standing right next to him when he said it. And she laughed. The drive back to Charleston from my parents' house in Columbia always felt longer than it actually was. 90 minutes on paper, something closer to 3 hours in your chest. I'd made that drive 100 times, and every single time I crossed the Congaree River and felt the skyline open up around me, I exhaled in a way I never quite managed in that house, like my lungs had been holding something in the whole time and only let go when I was far enough away. It was a Sunday in late September when my mother called. I was in the middle of reviewing the new fall menu with my chef, Jade standing behind me with her clipboard, and a very expressive raised eyebrow that meant she was already reading my face for damage. "Sweetheart," my mother said, "your brother has something exciting planned and we all think it would be so special if you could be involved." I put her on speaker. Jade's eyebrow went higher. My brother and his wife were coming up on their 10th anniversary. He'd been talking about a big celebration since spring, something impressive, something that would make a statement. He was a mid-level manager at a commercial real estate firm, which in his mind translated to a lifestyle that the salary didn't quite support. He'd always been that way. Reach further than the arm, expect someone else to cover the distance. I listened to my mother explain the plan. A private dinner, 60 guests, open bar, 5 courses, live music if possible. A venue in Charleston because his wife had always loved the city. And then the part I was waiting for. The part I could already feel coming like weather. "And we were thinking," she said carefully, "since you work in the industry and you know people, maybe you could help put it all together. You know how your brother feels about Charleston. He'd love your input." My input. Right. I told her I'd think about it. I got off the phone. Jade set her clipboard down on the counter. Very gently, the way you put something down when you're trying not to throw it. She said, "Let me guess." I said, "He wants a party," she said. "And he wants you to pay for it," I said. My mother framed it as wanting my input. Jade picked her clipboard back up. "Same thing," she said. I didn't disagree. My brother had spent most of our adult lives operating under a very specific assumption about me. The assumption was that because I hadn't gone to a 4-year university, because I'd taken a different road, a harder and messier and longer road, I was somehow still behind him, still catching up. He had the degree, the firm handshake, the business cards with the embossed logo. I had, in his words, managed to make something decent out of a risky situation. Like my restaurant was a lucky accident. Like I'd stumbled into it. Like the 6 years of 60-hour weeks, and every dollar I'd ever saved and borrowed and earned and reinvested had just sort of arranged themselves into something by chance. He wasn't cruel the way some people are cruel. He wasn't mean on purpose. He was something harder to argue with. He was dismissive. The kind of person who reduces you with a compliment. "Oh, you've done really well for yourself," said with just enough warmth to make you feel ungrateful for noticing what was underneath it. His wife was more straightforward about it. She once told me at Thanksgiving that my restaurant was, quote, "very cute for what it is." She said it while looking at her phone. I went back to reviewing the menu. Jade pretended to write something down. We didn't talk about the call again that day, but I felt it sitting there the rest of the afternoon like a stone in the bottom of a shoe, small enough to ignore, present enough to change the way you walk. 2 days later, my brother called himself. He didn't open with, "Hello, how are you?" He opened with, "So Mom told you about the dinner. I've been looking at venues, and I think Harborview House is the right fit. I need you to reach out to your contacts there and get me a booking." I was quiet for a second. He kept going. "The date is November 15th. I want the private dining room. Full buyout if possible. And Claire, this needs to be top of the line. Elena's parents are flying in from Boston. My boss is coming. This is a big deal for me. I need it to reflect well. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something more like recognition. The feeling of watching a pattern complete itself again, and realizing you'd always known it would. I said, "And you're thinking I would just set this up for you?" He said, "I mean, it's what you do. You know people." I said, "I know people because I built relationships over years in this industry. That's not a favor bank." He sighed. That particular sigh I'd known since childhood. The one that said I was being difficult. You're being difficult, he said, which confirmed it. It's my anniversary, Claire. 10 years. I'm not asking you to pay for it. I'm just asking you to use your connections. Can you do that for me or not? I told him I'd see what I could do. I shouldn't have. I knew I shouldn't have even as I said it. But there's something about a lifetime of being the one who figures things out that makes capitulation feel like muscle memory. I called Jade. She listened without interrupting, which was how I knew she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. She said, "You know he's going to expect a discount." I said, "He's going to expect free," she said. "And when he finds out the connection you pull is you?" I didn't answer that right away, because the truth was I wasn't sure I was ready for that conversation. Harborview House was mine. I'd bought the property 4 years ago, renovated it over 18 months, opened it quietly, grown it slowly. It had been featured in 2 national food publications and 1 architecture magazine. I didn't advertise my ownership widely. Not because I was hiding it, just because I'd learned early that the moment people know you own something, they start treating it like it belongs to them too. My brother didn't know. My parents had a vague sense that I was doing well, but the specifics had never been something I broadcast. I drove a practical car. I lived in a nice but not showy apartment. My money went back into the business, and into investments, and into a savings account that I looked at sometimes late at night when I needed to feel something solid. "Let him book it," Jade said finally. "Let the whole thing move forward, and then we'll see." "That's dangerous," I said. She said, "Or it's exactly what he needs." I didn't make the call. I waited. 2 more days passed, and then my brother's assistant reached out directly to Harborview House's reservation line, which was managed by my front-of-house director. She booked the full private dining room buyout for November 15th. 60 guests, 5-course tasting menu, full bar, live jazz. The invoice was sent to my brother's corporate email. He called me that same evening. He said, "Okay, so I went ahead and booked directly. But I need you to talk to whoever runs that place and see about the pricing. The quote they sent is steep." I said, "How steep?" He said the number. I said nothing. He said, "I mean, for a family connection, it seems like they could do better. You know people there, right? Can you call in a favor?" I said I would look into it. He said, "And Elena wants white orchids. Real ones, not the waxy fake kind. And tell them not to overdo the candles. Last time we were at a place like that, it smelled like a spa and I couldn't taste my food." I hung up. Jade appeared in my office doorway, approximately 45 seconds later, as though she had been waiting outside the whole time. She said, "Well," I said, "he wants a family discount and specific orchids." She said, naturally. I said, "We're not doing anything yet." She said, "I know." She was smiling, though. The next 3 weeks moved the way time moves when you're watching something build toward its own conclusion. My brother sent 3 more emails, each one more specific than the last. Dietary restrictions for 12 guests. A particular whiskey he wanted at the bar. A question about whether the lighting could be adjusted to be more, quote, flattering on camera, because they were hiring a photographer. I forwarded each one to Jade without comment. She handled them through the normal reservation process without giving anything away. I kept working. That's the thing about having built something real. The work doesn't stop for the drama. There were menus to finalize and a roof repair I'd been putting off, and a new sous chef I was evaluating, and a review from a Charlotte food critic that had come in strong and needed a response. I didn't have the luxury of sitting in my feelings. I built this restaurant by not having that luxury, and I wasn't about to stop now. But there were nights. There were nights when I'd close the restaurant and walk through the empty dining room and run my hand along the back of one of the chairs and think about where all of it came from. The summer I was 19 and my father sat me down and told me in the gentlest possible way that they couldn't afford to help me with school, that my brother had gotten the money for his college fund, and there wasn't enough left. He looked so sorry when he said it. Genuinely sorry. And I told him it was okay. I meant it. I wasn't angry at my father. But I was sitting in that chair, 19 years old, and I heard my mother say to someone on the phone 2 days later, "I just think Claire is more practical anyway. She doesn't need the same things Marcus does. She'll figure it out." She said it like it was a compliment. Like practicality was the same as not needing. I figured it out. I waitressed through my early 20s and saved every dollar that wasn't rent. I took a job managing a small catering company and learned everything I could learn. I took a business course at a community college at night. I read. I made mistakes, and fixed them, and made better ones. At 27, I leased a small space in a neighborhood that nobody was paying attention to yet. At 29, I turned my first real profit. At 31, I bought Harborview House with cash I had earned and saved and invested. Nobody handed me a fund. Nobody paid my tuition. Nobody called it an investment in my future. But my brother got a graduation trip to Europe, and a car for his 22nd birthday, and an introduction to the firm, where he still worked through a friend of my father's, and none of that was ever talked about as an advantage. It was just the normal shape of things. I pressed my palm flat against the chair back and stood up and turned off the lights. The week before the dinner, things started to move. My brother called on a Tuesday morning while I was doing a walkthrough of the event setup. He sounded different, a little wound tight. He said, "I need to talk to you about something, and I need you not to make it a thing." I said, "Okay." He said, "Elena and I are a little stretched right now financially. The anniversary trip we took in the summer, it was more than we planned. And with her parents flying in and the photographer and everything," he paused. "I was wondering if you could cover the venue cost. As a gift. A 10th anniversary is a milestone, Claire. And you're doing well, and it would really mean a lot." I said, "How much is the quote?" He told me, "It was not a small number." I said, "That's a significant ask." He said, "I know, but you could do it. You know you could. And it's not like I'm asking you to do this every year. It's once. 10 years is a big deal." I said, "Let me think about it." He said, "Don't think too long. The deposit is due Friday." I got off the phone and stood at the entrance to the private dining room. Jade was behind me. She'd heard enough. She said, "Are you going to tell me what you're thinking?" I said, "I'm thinking about how he framed it as a gift. Not a loan. A gift." Jade said, "Of course he did." I said, "If I pay for this dinner, he will never know I own this place. He'll think I called in a favor and threw money at it, and he'll tell that story at Christmas, and I'll become the version of me he's always made me." Jade waited. I said, "And if I don't pay for it?" She said, "Then Friday comes and the deposit doesn't clear and the booking gets flagged." I said, "And I handle it as the owner." Jade said, "Which you are." I didn't say anything else. I walked to the window and looked out at the harbor. The water was flat and silver that morning, quiet the way November water gets. I said, "Don't cancel the booking. Don't change anything. Let Friday come." Friday came. The deposit didn't clear. My front of house director, following standard protocol, sent a notice to the contact on the reservation. The contact was my brother's assistant. His assistant forwarded it to him. He called me within the hour. He was not calm. He said, "What is going on with this venue? They're saying the deposit wasn't processed. Did you not talk to your contact there? I thought you were handling this." I said, "I never said I was handling it." He said, "Claire, my boss is coming to this dinner. Elena's parents are coming. I cannot have this fall apart a week out. Do you understand how that would look?" I said, "I understand." He said, "So fix it. Call whoever you know there and get this sorted out." I said, "I'll reach out today." He said, "Today means today, not tomorrow." I reached out. I reached out by walking downstairs to the main kitchen and telling Jade to confirm the reservation was still active and to send my brother an updated invoice with the full balance due in 7 days. Standard policy. No discount applied. Jade said, "Your name's on the invoice as owner." I said, "I know." She paused. She said, "He's going to see it before the dinner." I said, "Yes." She looked at me for a long moment. She said, "Or he won't read it carefully. People don't always read carefully when they're stressed." She was right. My brother called back 3 hours later, agitated about the balance amount, wanting to talk about whether there was any flexibility, asking if I'd spoken to my contact, asking if I could just go in person and talk to someone. He did not mention the owner name on the invoice. He had not read carefully. He told him I'd handle it. I told him to confirm his guest list and send the dietary restrictions update I'd been asking for. He thanked me. He actually thanked me, warmly, the way he did when he thought things were going his way. That night, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine and let myself feel the full weight of what I was about to walk into. Because I'm not going to tell you I was calm and collected and certain. I wasn't. There was a version of me that wanted to just call him. Tell him over the phone. Let him process it privately. Avoid the whole thing. But then I thought about the word gift. The assumption wrapped inside it. The easy confidence that I would simply absorb the cost because I could, and because he needed it, and because that had always been the unspoken contract between us, that my success existed in service of his comfort, that what I built was a resource, not a life. I thought about my mother saying she'll figure it out. I poured the rest of the wine down the sink and went to bed. November 15th was a cold, clear Saturday, the kind of Charleston evening that earns the city its reputation. All salt air and golden light, and the kind of beauty that makes you forgive the summers. Harborview House looked exactly the way I'd always wanted it to look. White orchids at every table, because I'd approved that detail myself. Candles low and clean-smelling. The jazz trio set up in the corner. 60 covers prepped and ready. I was upstairs in my office when the first cars arrived. I watched through the window as my brother and Elena came up the walk. He was in a navy suit. She was in something red. They looked happy, genuinely, and for just a moment I felt the complicated ache of that, of wanting good things for someone who has never fully let you in. His boss arrived shortly after, a broad man in his 60s with the easy posture of someone who had been comfortable for a long time. Elena's parents came next, Boston accents and matching wool coats. Jade appeared in my office doorway. She said, "They're asking to see the owner to say thank you. They think you arranged the whole thing as a gift." I took a breath. I said, "Of course they do." I smoothed my jacket. It was a deep green blazer I'd bought the year the first good review came out. I'd worn it twice. It felt right for tonight. I walked down the stairs slowly, not for drama, just because my heels needed the pace on those steps, and because I'd learned that entering a room before you're ready never serves you. I came into the private dining room from the hall side. My brother was standing near the bar with his boss. Jade was behind me, quiet as a shadow. My brother heard my heels first. He turned. The smile he offered was automatic, and then something in it shifted, because I wasn't smiling the way an accommodating little sister smiles when she's done someone a favor. I was smiling the way a person smiles on their own ground. He said, "Claire, hey, you made it, come meet." I extended my hand to his boss first. I said, "Good evening. I'm Claire. I own Harborview House. Welcome." The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens when a room recalibrates. His boss looked at me. He looked at my brother. He said, "You own this place?" I said, "Built it out 4 years ago. We're glad to have your group here tonight." His boss said, "Marcus, I didn't realize your sister was." He paused, looking around. "All of this." My brother said nothing. I saw him doing the math in real time, fast and unpleasant arithmetic. The invoice, the owner name, the discount he'd assumed I would arrange, the gift he'd asked me to give him. Elena had gone still near the orchid centerpiece. Her mother was watching me with something that was not quite suspicion and not quite admiration, but somewhere between. I said to his boss, "If there's anything you need this evening, please don't hesitate to let any of my staff know. Jade here is my floor director, and she'll make sure everything runs perfectly." His boss said, "I have to say, this is a beautiful space. How long have you been in the industry?" I said, "About 12 years. Started from the ground up." He said, "Impressive. Genuinely impressive." I smiled. I turned to my brother then, just briefly, just enough. I said, "Congratulations on 10 years. I hope tonight is everything you wanted." I passed him. I did not lean in. I did not explain myself. I walked back toward the hall, and I heard his boss say something behind me, something I wasn't meant to hear, something about how he hadn't known, how remarkable, and I kept walking. I spent the rest of the evening moving through the restaurant the way I always did on event nights, checking the kitchen timing, making sure the wine pairings were on schedule, stepping outside twice to get cold air and quiet. Around 9 o'clock, Elena found me near the service entrance. She was holding a glass of champagne she hadn't touched. She said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know." She said, "Marcus told me you had connections here. I didn't realize." I said, "It's all right." She looked at me for a moment. She seemed like she wanted to say something else. She didn't. She went back inside. My mother called at 10:15. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 10:40. I let that one go too. At 11, I sat at my desk upstairs and listened to the jazz finishing downstairs and the sound of 60 people having a good evening, and I tried to locate the feeling I'd expected to have, the sharp satisfaction I'd imagined, the feeling of scales finally tipping. It wasn't there. Not exactly. What was there was quieter than that. What was there was the simple fact of sitting in a room I owned at the end of a night I'd made possible, and knowing, cleanly and completely, that I had not made myself small for anyone. Not tonight. My brother texted at midnight. It was brief. It said, "We need to talk." I read it. I put my phone face down. I finished my water. I checked in with the closing crew. I turned off my office light. The conversation happened 4 days later. He came to the restaurant on a Tuesday, the closed day. He sat across from me at the bar, jacket on, hands folded. He looked like a man who had been rehearsing something and had changed his mind about it several times. He said, "Why didn't you just tell me?" I said, "Tell you what specifically?" He said, "That you owned it, that it was yours." I said, "You booked it without asking me. You asked me to call in a favor to a place you didn't know I owned. You asked me to pay for it as a gift, and didn't wait for my answer before assuming I would." He said, "I would have handled it differently if I'd known." I said, "I know you would have." He heard what I wasn't saying. The silence sat between us. He said, "I didn't realize how much you'd—" He gestured around the restaurant built. I said, "I know." He said, "I should have." I said, "Yes?" He looked at his hands. He said, "I've always thought of you as—" And then he stopped. I said, "I know what you've always thought of me as." He said, "That's not fair." I said, "Which part?" He didn't answer. I watched his jaw tighten and release. He was not a bad man. That was the complicated truth I'd carried for years. He was not malicious. He was careless in the specific way that people are careless when they have never had to pay close attention to someone. When someone has always just been there, just been manageable, just been fine. I said, "I don't need an apology that comes with a list of reasons. I just need you to understand that what you built your impression of me on wasn't accurate." He said, "I know that now." I said, "Good, I mean that, good." He left an hour later. We hugged at the door, a little stiff, a little careful. The kind of hug that is a beginning of something different, not a resolution of something finished. I watched his car pull away from the curb. Jade appeared from the back, coffee in hand. She said, "How'd it go?" I said, "Like most honest conversations. A little sad, a little necessary." She handed me the coffee. She said, "You know his boss called here this morning." I looked at her. She said, "He wants to book the private room for their firm's holiday dinner. Asked for you directly." I held the coffee with both hands. I said, "Of course he did." She said, "Should I confirm?" I said, "Yes. Take good care of them." She went back to the kitchen. I stood at the front window and looked out at the street. It was a gray Tuesday, the kind that feels like the city is thinking. A few people walked by with their coats pulled close. A food delivery cyclist cut through the intersection and disappeared around the corner. I thought about my mother's voicemails, which I'd finally listened to the night before. Her voice had been careful, measured, doing that thing it did when she was reconstructing a narrative she was comfortable with. She said my brother had been very moved by the dinner. She said it had clearly been a beautiful gesture. She said she hoped I wasn't making it more complicated than it needed to be. I'd sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after that. There's a kind of grief that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive in a wave. It moves in like a weather system, slow and total, until you realize it's been raining for days, and you just didn't have a name for it yet. That's the grief of finally seeing something clearly. Not the event, the pattern, the years of it, the many small ways you were measured by a standard that was never applied evenly and told to feel grateful for the chance to prove yourself. I didn't call my mother back that night. I made tea instead and sat at the kitchen table and let myself just be in the quiet, not numb, not angry, present. I used to think I needed them to see it. The thing I'd built, the life I'd made, the distance I'd traveled without a map. I thought if they could just see it clearly, really see it, something would shift. Some acknowledgement would come that would settle the account. Standing at that window on a gray Tuesday, I understood something I couldn't have explained to myself 5 years ago. The account was never going to be settled by someone else. The settlement was mine to make, alone, and it looked nothing like what I'd imagined. It looked like this: a restaurant I built, staff I trusted, a cup of coffee going warm in my hands, a Tuesday morning, without anyone telling me who I was. I texted my mother that evening, short and clean. I said, "I got your messages. I'm doing well. I'll call soon." She replied with a heart emoji and something about Sunday dinner. I put my phone in my jacket pocket and went back to work. 2 weeks later, my brother sent me a bottle of wine with a card. The card said, "I'm still thinking about our conversation. I think I've had a lot of things wrong for a long time." That's all it said. No buts, no qualifications. No history rewritten to make himself more comfortable. I put the card in the top drawer of my desk. I opened the wine that Friday after closing, poured a glass, and sat in the empty dining room in the dark for a little while, not waiting for anything, not hoping anyone would call or show up or say the right thing, just sitting in something I built, which had become the closest thing I knew to peace. If you've ever felt like the person your family sees when they look at you, and the person you actually are, have almost nothing in common, I want you to know I understand that. I carried it for years. I mistook their blindness for my own inadequacy. I thought if I just worked harder, built more, proved enough, eventually the gap would close. It doesn't close that way. It closes when you stop needing it to. You don't have to announce yourself. You don't have to convince anyone. You just have to keep building the thing that is yours and let it stand on its own ground. That's enough. I promise you. That is more than enough.